Sometimes the greatest tragedies are not endings, but the violent beginnings of a destiny we could never have chosen for ourselves. Emptiness. That was the only word for the silence that suffocated Amelia's ranch in the Powder River Valley. The sun had bleached the plains to the color of bone, and the wind moaned through the slats of the forgotten barn. 3 weeks ago, she had buried her husband Jacob, taken by a wild Mustang. 1 week ago, her newborn son, whose lungs were too fragile for this harsh world. All that remained was the ache in her chest from milk that would not be taken and a tiny, vacant blanket. The sudden drumming of hoofbeats shattered the stillness. Through the heat haze, a lone rider approached. He was an Arapaho warrior, his face a mask of desperation, a small bundle cradled in his arms. Her heart seized. The warrior stopped his weary horse a safe distance away. His name was Cale, and his dark eyes mirrored the same hollowed grief Amelia saw in her own reflection each morning. She reached for the heavy rifle leaning by the door, a familiar comfort, but a thin, desperate wail from the deerskin bundle froze her hand. It was the cry of a starving infant. Cale dismounted slowly, his hands open and visible. He was no threat. He was a father pushed to the edge of his world. He walked closer, his worn moccasins making no sound on the parched earth. Then, to her astonishment, he knelt in the dust before her porch, a gesture of absolute surrender that spoke more than words. "My son is dying," he said, his English broken by exhaustion and sorrow. His mother walked the spirit road at his birth. He needs milk. The word struck Amelia with the force of a physical blow. She possessed the very thing that could save this child, the life-giving sustenance her own baby never had. But to give it meant crossing a chasm between their worlds, a divide so deep and wide she feared there would be no return. The infant's cries grew weaker, a sound that twisted in her soul. She saw not a warrior but a father, his pride laid bare in the dust for the sake of his child. This was a choice that would define her entire existence. Meanwhile, miles away in the smoky saloon of Redemption Gulch, a man named Malachi Blackwood smiled. He was a land baron whose greed was a living thing. His spies had reported something far more valuable than cattle on the late Jacob's land. A hidden spring, a source of water in a land dying of thirst. Water was more precious than gold. Jacob's death was a gift, but his stubborn widow stood in the way. News of the Arapaho warrior riding toward her ranch ignited a wicked idea in his mind. He would not have to get his own hands dirty. There were other ways to clear the land of unwanted pests, ways that used tradition itself as a weapon. Malachi summoned a man named Rorik, Cale's own cousin, a warrior whose heart was poisoned by jealousy. Rorik had always coveted Cale's standing in the tribe, his skill as a hunter, and the respect he commanded. "Your cousin consorts with the settlers," Malachi hissed, sliding a heavy pouch of gold across the table. "He brings shame to your people. And he carries a motherless child, a bad omen." Rorik's eyes narrowed, the gold a tempting weight in his hand. Malachi saw his opening and pressed his advantage. "Our ways are clear. Such a child cannot remain. It must be cleansed. You would be a hero for enforcing the old laws." Back at the ranch, Amelia made her choice. She descended the porch steps, her bare feet silent on the sun-warmed wood. Without a word, she took the tiny, feverish infant from Cale's arms. The baby was so light, a fragile bird. She sat on the steps, unbuttoned her dress, and offered her breast. As the infant latched on with surprising strength, a wave of profound relief washed over her, easing an ache she thought would never leave. In that moment, the emptiness that had consumed her began to fill with a fierce, protective purpose. She looked up at Cale, whose face was a study in stunned, overwhelming gratitude. Their moment of shared humanity was short-lived. In the distance, a cloud of dust rose against the horizon. It was small, but it was moving fast. Cale's expression hardened. He knew the riders, he knew the way they sat their horses. "Rorik," he whispered, his voice laced with both sorrow and steel. "They come for my son." Amelia looked from the dust cloud to the peacefully nursing baby in her arms. An hour ago, she had nothing left to lose. Now, she held a new life in her arms, a life she had just saved. She would not let it be taken. "Then we must ride," she said, her voice firm, surprising them both. They moved with frantic speed. Cale secured their meager supplies to his horse, while Amelia wrapped the baby, whom she had already named Leo, in her own son's blanket. She saddled her mare, her hands moving with a forgotten confidence. As the riders crested the nearest ridge, Cale lifted her onto her horse. For a moment, their eyes met, a silent pact passing between them. Two strangers from warring worlds, now united by a single desperate cause. They spurred their horses into a gallop, disappearing into the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the Badlands. The chase had begun. For 2 days, they rode through a labyrinth of canyons and dry riverbeds. Cale was a master of this land. He taught Amelia how to mask their tracks, how to find water seeping from rock formations, how to move like a whisper on the wind. She, in turn, tended to Leo with a mother's devotion, her knowledge of prairie herbs proving useful in keeping his infant skin from chafing. In the evenings, huddled by small, smokeless fires, they spoke. He told her of his late wife, Mourning Dove, and the traditions of his people. She spoke of Jacob, of their dreams for the ranch, and the crushing weight of her grief. Respect slowly blossomed between them, a fragile flower in the desert. One night, Leo developed a fever. His small body burned with heat, and his cries were weak. Cale, calm and focused, gathered yarrow and the broad leaves of comfrey. He chewed them into a poultice, a technique passed down through generations, and gently applied it to the baby's chest. He showed Amelia how to brew a thin tea from the remaining herbs. All night, they took turns watching over the child, their hands occasionally brushing in the firelight. This shared vigil, this fight for one small life, wove a bond of trust between them. The bond was tested when Rorik's riders finally cornered them. They were trapped in a box canyon with steep walls and only one way out. Rorik and his warriors appeared on the rim above, their figures silhouetted against the morning sun. Amelia clutched Leo, her heart hammering. "Give us the child, Cale," Rorik called down, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "He is an abomination. Let us cleanse the shame." He sounded so certain, so righteous. But Amelia saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the way he avoided looking directly at the baby. He was not a monster. He was a pawn. Cale stepped forward, his hands raised. "Brother," he called up, his voice calm and strong, "you do not hunt for tradition. You hunt for a liar's gold. Malachi Blackwood plays you for a fool." Rorik flinched, the truth of the words striking a nerve. In that moment of hesitation, Amelia saw their chance. A precarious ledge of loose rock jutted out directly above Rorik's men. She caught Cale's eye and gave a subtle nod. He understood instantly. He continued speaking, drawing Rorik's attention, while Amelia took aim with Jacob's old revolver. She fired not at the men, but at the rock above them, unleashing a thundering rockslide. The cascade of rock and dust was terrifying. It did not harm Rorik or his men, but it completely blocked the canyon entrance, cutting them off. Dust filled the air, and horses screamed in panic. Under the cover of the chaos, Cale grabbed the reins of Amelia's horse and led them deeper into the canyon, toward a narrow game trail she had not noticed before. They rode hard, the sound of the rockslide echoing behind them like a closing door. They had won a temporary reprieve, but Amelia knew Rorik would not give up. She had fired a firearm. She had taken a side. Her old life was truly gone forever. Deeper in the wilderness, they stumbled upon an abandoned prospector's cabin, half swallowed by the unforgiving land. Inside, they found not gold, but something far more valuable, a leather-bound journal. The old man had detailed his desperate search for gold, but also his discovery of the hidden spring on what was now Amelia's land. He wrote of how Malachi Blackwood had visited him, feigning friendship, only to trick him into selling his claim for a pittance. Blackwood had known about the water all along. The journal was proof of his calculated deception. Tucked into the back of the journal was another piece of evidence, a folded document that made Amelia's blood run cold. It was an early deed to her own property, with what was clearly a forged signature of her late husband, Jacob. Blackwood had been plotting to steal her land even before Jacob had died. The pursuit, the manipulation of Rorik, the talk of tradition, it was all a smokescreen. A complex, cruel scheme to secure the water source and consolidate his power. Cale looked at Amelia, his eyes dark with understanding. "This is not about Leo," he said softly. "It never was." A new resolve settled over them. They could not keep running. Justice had to be served, not just for them, but for the old prospector and for the memory of Jacob. Their objective had changed from survival to reclamation. But facing Malachi Blackwood in Redemption Gulch was a suicidal notion for a lone woman and an Arapaho warrior. They needed an ally, someone within the town who had the courage to stand against a tyrant. Amelia thought of one man, a friend of her father's. "Dr. Martin," she said, a spark of hope in her voice. He never trusted Blackwood. They traveled by night, avoiding main trails, and reached the outskirts of Redemption Gulch, under the cover of darkness. Leaving Cale and Leo hidden in a thicket of cottonwood trees, Amelia crept into town. The doctor's house was dark, but a single lamp burned in his study. Dr. Martin was a man of science and quiet integrity. When he saw Amelia at his door, her face smudged with dirt, and her eyes filled with a desperate fire, he ushered her inside without a word. She laid the journal and the forged deed on his desk. As he read, his expression shifted from concern to cold fury. "I knew it," Dr. Martin said, his voice a low growl. "Blackwood has been strangling this valley for years, controlling the water, buying up ranches for pennies on the dollar." He looked at Amelia. "But this is monstrous, using a child's life as a pawn." He agreed to help. The plan was simple but dangerous. He would call a town meeting in the saloon the next day, officially to discuss the ongoing water shortages. It was the one topic that would guarantee everyone's attendance. "When the whole town is listening," the doctor said, "we will give them a truth more powerful than Blackwood's gold." The next day, the saloon was packed. Ranchers, merchants, and weary travelers filled the room, their faces etched with worry over the drought. Malachi Blackwood sat at a central table, radiating an aura of untouchable power, a wolf among sheep. He listened with a condescending smile as Dr. Martin began to speak about shared resources and community hardship. He believed he was in complete control of the narrative, that this meeting was merely a forum for the powerless to vent their frustrations before accepting his inevitable dominance. He had no idea the ground was about to crumble beneath him. Just as Dr. Martin finished his opening remarks, the saloon doors swung open. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Amelia entered, her head held high, her simple dress torn and dusty from the trail. Beside her walked Cale, holding Leo, his presence a silent and powerful challenge to the established order of the town. All eyes turned to them, then to Malachi Blackwood, whose face had become a thunderous mask of rage. The trap was set. The confrontation that would decide the fate of the entire valley was about to begin in the heart of the enemy's stronghold. An unnatural silence fell over the saloon. Malachi Blackwood was the first to speak, his voice dripping with false concern. "Amelia, my dear child, we were so worried. This savage has clearly done something to you." Amelia met his gaze without flinching. "The only savage in this room, Malachi, is you." She stepped forward and threw the prospector's journal onto his table. "This book tells a story of your greed, of how you stole a man's discovery and left him with nothing." The ranchers murmured amongst themselves, their eyes shifting from Blackwood to the journal. The first crack in his armor had appeared. "Lies," Blackwood scoffed, but a bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. "The ramblings of a failed old man." Amelia then produced the forged deed. "And is this a lie as well? My husband's signature, forged by your hand. You tried to steal my land before he was even cold in the ground." She held it up for all to see. The town blacksmith, who had known Jacob since he was a boy, squinted at the document. "That ain't Jacob's hand," he declared, his voice booming through the room. "I'd stake my life on it." The murmurs grew louder, turning from suspicion to anger. At that moment, the saloon doors opened again. It was Rorik. He walked not with the arrogance of a warrior, but with the heavy steps of a man burdened by shame. He had followed them, not to fight, but to understand. He had seen the proof in the canyon and now saw it again. He stopped in the center of the room. "She speaks the truth," he said, his voice clear and steady. "Malachi Blackwood paid me in gold to hunt my own cousin. He used the sacred laws of my people to mask his own greed. He told us the child was a curse. The only curse here is this man's black heart." The confession was the final blow. The crowd erupted. Men who had feared Blackwood for years now surged forward, their faces contorted with rage. His hired guns, seeing their paymaster's power evaporate, quietly slipped out the back door. Malachi was alone, surrounded by the very people he had oppressed. Dr. Martin stepped in front of the mob. "There will be no violence," he commanded. "We are a town of laws, not a pack of wolves." He looked at Blackwood with utter contempt. "Your reign is over. Leave now and never return." Defeated and exposed, Malachi Blackwood fled Redemption Gulch that night, a shadow disappearing into the darkness he had created. His empire, built on lies and intimidation, had crumbled in a single afternoon. The town, free from his oppressive grip, began to breathe again. The ranchers worked together to manage the water from the spring, ensuring it was shared fairly among all. The fragile trust that Blackwood had shattered slowly began to mend, forged in the crucible of their shared struggle against a common enemy. Redemption Gulch had started to live up to its name. Rorik returned to his people. He stood before the tribal council and told the entire story of Blackwood's deception and his own willing participation driven by jealousy. He accepted his punishment without complaint, working to regain the trust he had broken. He also spoke of Cale's honor and Amelia's courage. The elders, after much deliberation, declared that any child who could inspire such a powerful alliance and survive such an ordeal could not be a curse. They sent a message to Cale, not of forgiveness, but of understanding. The path was clear for him to return one day, if he so chose. Amelia and Cale returned to the ranch on the Powder River. The land was the same, but they were forever changed. The silence that had once been filled with grief was now filled with the soft gurgles of a healthy baby and the quiet comfort of shared companionship. The chasm between their worlds had vanished, bridged by respect, trust, and a love that had been forged in the heart of adversity. In a simple ceremony witnessed only by the vast sky and the silent plains, they married, binding their lives together. They were no longer two separate souls, but a family. Their ranch became a beacon of hope. The life-giving spring that Malachi had coveted became a symbol of their new life. It nourished their land and their growing family, for in time they were blessed with 2 more children of their own. Their home was a place where 2 cultures met and merged, creating something new and stronger. Their son, Leo, grew up learning the Arapaho stories of his father and the frontier resilience of his mother. He was a child of 2 worlds, destined not to be torn between them, but to unite them. Years passed. The ranch flourished, and the small community that grew around it became a model of cooperation. Settlers and Arapaho, once separated by fear and misunderstanding, learned to trade, to help one another during harsh winters, and to respect each other's ways. Amelia, with her calm demeanor and knowledge of both settler medicine and the herbal remedies Cale taught her, became a respected healer for both peoples. Cale became a leader, a voice of reason and a bridge between the tribal council and the growing town of Redemption Gulch. Leo grew into a fine young man, his father's keen eyes and his mother's compassionate heart. He was a skilled rider and tracker, but he also possessed a sharp mind, hungry for the books Dr. Martin would bring him from the city. He embodied the best of both his parents, a living symbol of the peace they had fought so hard to create. He saw the lingering prejudices and the injustices that still existed, and he felt a calling not to the life of a rancher, but to the life of an advocate, a peacemaker who could speak the languages of both sides. One day, a dispute arose over new treaty lines drawn by a distant government, threatening to displace a band of Arapaho from their ancestral wintering grounds. Tensions flared, and old wounds were reopened. The army was called in, and the fragile peace of the valley hung by a thread. Cale was asked by the elders to speak for them, but he knew his voice alone was not enough. "They will not listen to me," he told Amelia one evening. "They see only a warrior. They need to hear a voice from their own world, one that also understands ours." They both looked at their son. Leo, now a man of 20, accepted the responsibility. He traveled to the territorial capital, armed not with a weapon, but with his story. He stood before the governor and the assembled politicians, men who had only ever seen the frontier as a place to be conquered. He spoke not of battles or treaties, but of a starving infant and a grieving mother. He spoke of how a single act of compassion had saved his life and created a family where none should have existed. He spoke of the community they had built, a testament to the fact that peace was not only possible, but profitable. His words, delivered with quiet conviction, had a profound effect. He was not a savage demanding rights. He was an eloquent man appealing to their shared humanity. He presented a plan, one he had developed with Cale and the ranchers, for a shared land use agreement that would benefit everyone. It was a revolutionary idea, based on mutual respect rather than conquest. The politicians were skeptical, but Leo's story had captured the imagination of the press. Newspapers began calling him the Child of the Prairie, a symbol of a new kind of West. The governor, under public pressure and genuinely moved by the young man's plea, agreed to visit the Powder River Valley himself. He saw firsthand the thriving community Amelia and Cale had built. He saw Arapaho children learning alongside settler children in a small schoolhouse. He saw ranchers sharing water and grazing land according to the seasons and the needs of the tribe. He saw a peace that was not enforced by soldiers, but maintained by mutual benefit and genuine friendship. What he saw was not a problem to be solved, but a solution to be emulated. The shared land use agreement was ratified. It became known as the Powder River Accord, a landmark piece of legislation that was studied and copied throughout the territories. It was a victory not of force, but of understanding. Leo returned home a hero, but he remained humble. "It was not my victory," he told his parents. "It was yours. It began the day you chose compassion over fear." That evening, as the sun set over the valley, Amelia and Cale stood on their porch, watching their children play. The old emptiness was a distant memory, replaced by a profound sense of peace. Amelia looked at Cale, his handsome face now etched with the fine lines of time and wisdom. His love had been her anchor, her strength. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked softly. "The day you rode up to this porch." Cale took her hand, his touch still as warm and steady as it had been all those years ago. "I think about it every day," he replied. "It was the day my son was given back to me. It was the day I found the other half of my heart." They stood in comfortable silence, their life a testament to the enduring power of their choice. Their story became a legend in the valley, a tale told to children around winter fires. It was a story about how a brave woman and a determined warrior defied their worlds to create a new one. It was a story about how hatred and greed could be conquered not by violence, but by the simple, earth-shattering power of a mother's love. It was a story that reminded everyone that family is not defined by the blood in your veins, but by the love in your heart. The ranch, with its life-giving spring, remained the heart of the community they had founded. As Amelia and Cale grew old, they watched their children and grandchildren build upon the foundation they had laid. The community thrived, a testament to the idea that different cultures could enrich one another rather than destroy each other. The Powder River Accord held strong, a lasting legacy of peace in a land that had known so much conflict. Their lives had not been easy, but they had been full, rich with a love that had overcome every obstacle placed in its path. They had faced down hatred, greed, and the unforgiving nature of the frontier itself. One autumn evening, with the scent of wood smoke in the air, an elderly Amelia sat on the porch, wrapped in a warm blanket, watching her grandchildren play. Cale sat beside her, his hand resting gently on hers. They no longer needed words to communicate. A lifetime of shared experiences had woven their souls together. She looked at the thriving, peaceful valley before her and thought of the desolate, empty woman she had once been. It seemed like another lifetime, another person. The journey had been perilous, but it had led her home. Her legacy was not in the land she owned or the wealth she had accumulated. It was in the laughter of the children playing in the twilight, a mix of Arapaho and settler stock. It was in the quiet respects between the ranchers and the tribesmen who now called each other neighbors. And it was in the enduring love she shared with the man who had ridden out of the heat haze all those years ago, carrying a dying child and a destiny she never could have imagined. Their story, born of tragedy, had become a quiet, beautiful triumph, an echo of hope on the vast American prairie.